know, it's said that every bride always remembers her wedding day in glowing detail. You can certainly say that for every groom as well. This groom included. I was lucky enough to marry my husband, Alfredo Casuso, in an incredibly beautiful garden. A garden designed by our next guest, landscape architect Stephen Suzman. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you, only I'm not a landscape architect.
And you told me that you were going to tell me the difference since I got it wrong.
You did indeed get it wrong.
Yeah.
I'm a landscape designer.
Yeah.
There is a difference.
Yeah.
There's a lot of confusion between landscape architect, landscape designer, and gardener.
Yeah.
And at one point they do merge. However, a landscape architect is someone who is licensed by the state, and various different states have different licensure requirements. And a landscape architect has to be licensed in the state of California in order to stamp drawings for construction.
And you are a landscape designer.
I'm a landscape designer. I never took my landscape architecture exam because by the time I was admitted to Berkeley, I was already too busy and decided to just continue working on my projects. And I hire landscape architects. I've got 4 very talented people working with me who've been landscape architects for over 20 years.
So you were like Benjamin Franklin. You self-taught, hired smart people, and became a genius in your career.
I wouldn't say a genius. I don't wish to court hubris. However, a landscape architect is different from a gardener.
Got it.
A gardener is someone who takes care of the garden once it's established and understands horticulture, and who understands maybe a bit of lighting and understands soil conditions and pests and irrigation systems.
So now, as the landscape designer, in a sense, you're very much the captain of your gardening ship. You're the person whose vision and relationship with the clients and knowledge of architecture and gardens and sometimes world history and literature comes to bear for the client, correct?
Correct. A landscape architect or landscape designer has to deal with many, many different things. Most of the work that we do is under the ground. We have to, first of all, design the space, so we have to understand how space works in terms of mass and void. We have to look at the architecture and see and ensure that the landscape and the architecture blend in a seamless manner, particularly nowadays with indoor-outdoor interest. We also take care of molding the land, grading and drainage, because shaping the land is very important. It's like sculpting the land, and especially on hilly sites, terracing and sculpting or creating berms on flat sites is a critical part of what we do.
And the result is, after your work, something that was nothing is now beautiful.
Well, I hope so. There's also the fourth function of time. But landscape architects can do everything outside of the skin of the building.
Right. You know, Stephen, I remember when I met you, probably now 26 years ago, learning about you and your family's very interesting history. Before we get into some more specifics of landscape design and whatnot, I'd like you to tell me a little bit about your history, where you were born and how did you make your way to the United States?
Oh, it was quite curious. I'm a bit of a maverick that way. I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, and was extremely active in anti-apartheid politics. My aunt, for many years, was the only member of parliament opposed to apartheid.
Helen Suzman.
Helen Suzman, and who was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and who ensured Mandela survived his captivity in Robben Island. And that was one of the most important parts of my life. I decided after a stint in Oxford, where I got a degree in modern languages, French and Italian, to make myself more useful. And I did a business degree at Stanford, thinking that in case things went seriously wrong, I would have an escape hatch. Well, they did start to go wrong in the 70s, so I emigrated, not because of the politics, but because it was very difficult being gay in South Africa at that time.
Let's stop for a second and go back to that. I mean, you know, South Africa to me is a fascinating country, not only vis-a-vis racial politics, but vis-a-vis LGBT politics. I mean, you went from a country that was an apartheid state to having, at least on paper, the Constitution, which is most LGBT friendly in the world. When you were growing up in Johannesburg, at what point did you know you were gay? And did you think that you would ever see your country have a constitution like it does now?
Well, I thought I figured it out at round about 14 or 15, and I never dreamt that South Africa would have this sort of constitution. It's a miracle, and it's the result of a couple of gay activists who were friendly with Mandela and persuaded him, and also Mandela was driving a car of a gay individual when he was actually arrested.
Really? I never heard that story. Do you think that South Africa has become a light for some of those countries still on the African continent where LGBT equality is a far ways off?
It's the only light on the continent. And gay marriage came long before America. Gay rights are enshrined in the Constitution. In fact, individual rights are enshrined in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. What was it like growing up as a boy there in an apartheid country?
It was very tricky. It was very difficult in a highly masculinized society that sports was God, and the ruling party was extremely belligerent and scorned women and anything to do with women. In fact, for a few years, my aunt was the only woman in Parliament.
This is Helen Suzman.
Yes, only a couple of years, but nonetheless, it was. There's a completely different bias. There are now probably many more women in the South African Parliament than there are in Congress today.
What was she like?
Feisty, with a wonderful sense of humor.
And she was always an anti-apartheid leader?
Always.
That must have been not only difficult, given the politics and the reality of South Africa during those decades, but I imagine it also could have been dangerous.
Well, she said she was only frightened once, and that is when she was coming back from visiting Winnie Mandela, who was then banned in a little town called Brantfort in the Orange Free State, and she was only allowed one visitor with permission at a time. And my aunt was followed, and she thought it would be so easy for the people to just push her off the road and create an accident. And she said that was the only time she was ever frightened. She used to keep a police whistle by her bed to deal with nasty phone calls.
Right. So, I mean, things like that did happen. People disappeared or had wrecks or
yes,
just didn't come back from certain things. Now, you've been back to South Africa numerous times over the last few years. What does it feel like now as an openly gay man, openly gay businessman, to go back and visit?
Well, it feels completely different. I mean, it just is much, I feel much freer, much less constrained, much, a degree of fear has been eliminated from me. I mean, little did I know, but the South African government was riddled with gay people, but of the Eric Roehm variety.
Yes.
You know, the very right wing.
Yeah, the famously gay closeted Nazi.
Exactly.
Colleague of Adolf Hitler's. To get back to your business.
Yes.
What does it take to make, I don't want to say a garden, what does it take to make a landscape beautiful and memorable, and how does your work make it unique?
Well, as I was saying before we had our little political discourse, I was saying that we do everything outside of the skin of the garden, of the house. So apart from, we do roof gardens, we do pergolas and arbors and summer houses and pools and fountains and walls and driveways and fences. It's not just pretty flowers.
Yes.
And the key is, first of all, you have to design a garden that is site-specific. There's no point in designing Versailles on a quarter of an acre in Menlo Park. It just doesn't work.
Although occasionally, do you have clients who want that?
I've had some rather bizarre You have to make it site-specific. There's no point in doing a tropical garden, you know, when you have constantly freezing temperatures. It just doesn't work. It doesn't look right.
Right. What are the current trends in landscaping?
And so what we have to say is we like to have it site-specific, architecture appropriate, and driven by the client's own program, which we then will edit because it's the client's garden. So I think attention to detail, attention to local codes and ordinances, which are very complex, and each little bailiwick has a different set of codes.
Right. But nowadays in 2014, are you getting different sort of requests than you did? I mean, you said you don't want to design a Versailles in a small space in Menlo Park, but were there certain types of requests that were more similar in the 80s and the 90s that you're not getting now?
Well, I think the gardens that we were designing 5 and 10 years ago were much more elaborate, much more expensive, money no object. Particularly when it came to materials, the stone could come from Italy, or we could use facades of villages that were drowned in the Yangtze Dam for our walls for instant patina. Those days are somewhat over. We are trying as best as we can to be sustainable, which is very difficult given the nature of some of our clientele.
Right.
It's easier when you are dealing with institutional projects, such as some of our projects in UC Berkeley or some of the library projects that we do, or commercial projects. Many of our clients want what they want when they want it.
And at a certain price.
And at a certain price. So it's complicated. Our gardens are simpler, and we have to really push drought tolerance because we are likely to face water rationing. Now, that doesn't mean to say that certain individuals are not prepared to have water shipped in to save their plants, but it is the notion that we can repeat East Coast gardens and English gardens forever in California. I think their days are numbered.
Right. In our last few moments, we only have a few seconds. Tell me about a project that really stands out in your mind, something that you're especially proud of over all the years.
Well, there are a couple. There's several. I would say one of them is maximal and the other one is minimal. Well, the two maximal projects are one project in Belvedere where we worked on a very ravishingly beautiful site with 270-degree views from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Raccoon Straits. And we designed these incredible walls out of the Chinese limestone villages, and all the railings were bronze. Actually, all the bronze details came from a Julia Morgan light fixture, which happened to be on the she designed one light fixture and one gate.
And we only have just a few more moments. The other one you wanted to mention.
The other one is a minimal garden in Pebble Beach where we only used 5 plants, mostly natives or native lookalikes, and it's very refined, very restrained, and all the beauty is in the stone and the Corten steel.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Stephen Suzman, landscape designer. I'm David Perry. Hopefully you're enjoying our restrained and beautiful show every week. Good night.